Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'd like to talk about how it is that movies are intrinsically misleading. And the reason that movies are intrinsically misleading is because they contain so much information, being both pictures and sound, as well as written things that are acted. And so because they're pictures and sound, there's actually a lot of talent that goes into a movie. This isn't quite so true if you go down to no-budget movies that don't have technicians. Like, if somebody were to just get some of their friends together and ad-lib a movie on a cell phone, this would only be slightly misleading. But when you get to anything that has any sort of reasonable budget, what you have is somebody who does makeup, somebody who does costumes, somebody who does hair, somebody who does wardrobe, somebody who does lighting, somebody who does camera work, someone who does sound, somebody who does sound editing. And then you also have, of course, the actor and the writer. So, if you think about it, this is a large group of people, each of whom are bringing their talents together into one combined act. So, when it comes to the dialogue, and again, in a halfway decent movie, when you see an actor speaking dialogue, the dialogue that he's speaking is the result of somebody who is talented at writing, somebody who is, much of the time, okay, so like if you're not watching, the recent Star Wars movies, say, but and to be fair, even occasionally they have, a quarter-way decent line. The dialogue isn't horrific. And even when it is really dumb and bad and not very good or even very interesting, it at least is going to be reasonably erudite. It's going to tend to have a decent vocabulary. It's going to tend to have a reasonable grasp of things like metaphor, of similes, of imagery to use, and so on. So, as a general rule, even a bad writer, now I tend to focus heavily on structure. Myself, it's my sort of favorite thing about narrative is the structure. That's where my attention is brought most. But even in wordplay, even somebody that's only like mediocre at wordplay and things like that will be better than average. And then you have the actor themselves. Now, this is a person most of the time who is unusually beautiful, although they're at least unusually charismatic for the most part. They are. Also, especially these days, they're often in good shape because as an actor, they have a lot of time and it's their job to get into decent physical condition. Not true 100% of the time, of course. But that said, it is frequently the case that you're looking at people who have a fair amount of time to devote to exercise and being fit and trim. They also have the wardrobe person who's really good at selecting clothing that looks good on the person, works well together in terms of things like going with the various features and just complementing their body type and everything well. You have makeup that is very skillfully applied, and so on. Carry it all the way through. And the thing is, you notice all of this stuff. You don't notice it in the sense of like, oh wow, that's really good makeup. That was, well, you do notice the lines more, but like, that line definitely had a, above 8th grade reading level in it. Person never says, and stammers and so on, and well, unless they're Jimmy Stewart. But, even when they do, it's in a charming sort of way. And, they almost never have to pause to think or so on. At the same time, they are also, the lighting is a little bit different because lighting is, ambient, but on the other hand, they always, they look good. Their clothing and so on matches the lighting environments that they're in rather well. And so when you put this all together, what you have is a person who has, what you are seeing is a person who has something like 50 hours in their day and about a good half dozen to dozen talents that are really that have been really developed extremely well. And so you pick up on this, not in a conscious way, but in a subconscious way, the people on the screen, just everything is going really well for them. Not in the sense of the things happening within the movie, but just clearly everything about their life is going fairly well up to this point. They're well nourished, but they're not fat. They're in decent shape. Again, they're exceptions, obviously. Their hair is done well. They're well, their grooming in general is well done. Their skin looks good. They're almost invariably they're selected for having a nice voice. And on and on. Like, all of these things are going well, and they're going well in ways that, like, you have to have had a fairly decent life to have developed this many skills. Well, you have to have a better than possible life, for the most part, to have developed this many skills when you put them all together. And so the thing about this is that it does tend to make a lot of, if things are going bad, or if somebody is supposed to have had a rough childhood or what have you, the thing is that never really matches what's actually on the screen. Similar to the classic thing from the 80s movie, where the unattractive girl was basically, a really beautiful woman who put on glasses and maybe, like, tied her hair up in a different, slightly different sort of way than normal. And that's it. And, a lot of people have commented on that. But of course, you're not going to actually show a genuinely unattractive person on the screen. No one would want to look at that. So you have a beautiful person playing an unattractive person with a few signals that like suggest they are, relative to everybody else, the unattractive one. But there's something that, but it doesn't actually match. And so it's one of the reasons, by the way, within those movies, that the people picking on the unattractive person always seem so incredibly mean. The way they're picking on them just doesn't match. The reactions do not match what you're actually seeing. People, unattractive people do often get treated worse than attractive people. And so when you've got an attractive person who just, like, is wearing glasses and has her hair tied up, it doesn't make any sense that, like, all the guys are ignoring her. It doesn't make any sense that you've got a good-looking, reasonably muscular, guy with a pleasant voice and a charismatic attitude being treated as if he's an unlikable nerd. Like, these things, they don't match up to each other, and that's why the villains seem so often in these things like cardboard cutouts of villains, that if you actually had an extremely unattractive person who was bad at speaking and just not charismatic, and they always just look, their face just looks sort of angry whenever you're not, like, when they're not, like, actively smiling. If you actually had that, a lot of these reactions would seem much more natural, because that's what they're kind of written for. And as much as people should treat unattractive people better, you at least will be seeing a normal human interaction, even if it is a fallen human interaction. Whereas when they're treating a beautiful person in this way, it doesn't make any sense. An even better example of this is whenever you have people who are supposed to be drunk. Every now and again in a movie, you will actually get somebody drunk in a way that, like, is fairly accurate, like where they're just vomiting on their shoes and stumbling around and they're not getting out a coherent sentence or whatever. But, I mean, there's a really good chance they're either going to end up as a murder victim or a suspect of the killing pretty darn soon, being that incapacitated. Short of that, the drunk people always manage to stay on topic. They talk about the things that are actually relevant to the moment, unlike actually drunk people. They can get out relatively grammatically correct, coherent sentences that, again, are about, like, the same thing they were talking about 3 seconds ago. And the same thing somebody else was talking about a few moments ago. It's an interesting thing dealing with actually drunk people and the way they just, like, will apologize over and over and over and over again. And, like, you just tell, can you... Like, it's fine, okay? I'm just helping you get to your bed. Don't worry about it. And they just keep on going, or telling you about, like, what's bothering them over and over and over and over again. And, like, not really, they can't hold anything like a conversation. And a really, really good example of this is actually the movie The Thin Man. I can't remember the actors' names, but Nick and Nora Charles are the main characters. And in the movie, The Thin Man was a book by Dashiell Hammett. And he also did The Maltese Falcon. It's a hard-boiled American detective series from the 1930s. And one of the things that qualifies something as a hard-boiled American detective story is that the detective gets beaten up and then, well, they have to get beaten up. It's just necessary. It's very helpful if they manage to get some sort of information usefully out of getting beaten up. But that's not 100% required. The beating up just has to be. And then, Nick Charles gets beaten up. I think shot at one point in The Thin Man. But they like you often see in movies from the 1930s or the 40s, they're frequently drinking. But by that I mean they frequently have martinis in their hand. They frequently order drinks. Not always martinis. I mean frequently all sorts of drinks. But they're constantly ordering alcoholic drinks, and then they hold them. Occasionally they will take a sip of them, but of course the actor isn't drinking hard liquor. The actor's drinking water. The actor is a person who has showed up to work today and would get in trouble if he were actually drunk. He would not remember his lines, among other things. And so what you have is a sober person who is putting on some of the airs of being drunk, or sometimes not even remembering to, but who's holding an awful lot of what is supposed to be alcohol, but not actually drinking it. When you read the book, The Thin Man, good movie by the way, Nick and Nora, The Thin Man. It's a lot of witty banter. It's fun. The reveal at the end was not very good, but leaving that aside, the actual mystery itself is actually fun and fairly well. I'm not big on American hard-boiled detectives. They tend to, especially the endings, they tend to not do very well. They really eschewed the idea of the detective actually revealing what happened in a useful way. And putting together the pieces and collecting it together into a coherent story. So there'll be some of that, but it doesn't really matter. It's really about the action. Yeah. Anyway, but they're dapper and they're charming and they're fun in the movie. In the book, it's really clear these are alcoholics. I mean, these characters in the book, these are not fun people who just frequently have drinks in their hand that they occasionally sip. These are people who drink a lot and are drunk, and they're high-functioning alcoholics. They have inhibited judgment. They have the problems. Some of the problems that go along with being a high functioning alcoholic. They're not constantly slurring their words. They're able to get out coherent sentences and so on. Not always perfectly about what other people are doing. They have very little concern for other people. But they're high-functioning alcoholics in the book. It's really obvious and really off-putting, actually. I mean, the fact that, if they spent any amount of time, usually it's by waking up, not drinking, the first thing they have to do is get over and get a drink. And they are clearly, within the book, unhappy until they finally get that first drink into them to get back to sort of normal level, normal for them, blood alcohol levels. The movie, of course, they might decide to do a drink, but they're smiling and they're happy, when they're asking for their morning hit of booze. They're not they're not the sort of grouches they very clearly were in the book, and so it's a and the thing is, you can't do that in a movie nearly as much. I mean, it was off-putting in the book. In a movie, it would be horrifically off-putting to have actors who are actually really genuinely grouching and unpleasant and unwilling to hold conversations until they get a drink, because it would take such a long time. In a book, you can just describe that real quickly. You could say she asked a question, say not till I've had my drink, and then say okay, now drain the shot of gin dry, and now I'm finally ready for a conversation. In a book, you can do that because you can skip everything in between. In a movie, it would take a while and it would be boring to go through it. So you can't. You simply can't do that in movies. But the result is the theme of this video. It's highly misleading. You get the idea of what you're presented on screen is simply it's not consistent. It's not coherent, really. It feels like it, but it isn't, and it is highly misleading in that, you're not watching alcoholics. You're not watching drunks. You're watching sober people who have memorized dialogue written by sober people, for the most part, And even, even if you get the occasional drunk of a writer, it's always like, the times when they're actually able to write, not most of the time when they do the writing. The plus it's been edited, and other people have, almost invariably other people have gone and helped with the editing and so on, and at least some of them will have been sober. So the whole thing, the whole effect is really interesting. And I'm not trying to say that movies are illegitimate, by the way. Movies can be great. They can be great things. They are intrinsically, even great movies, are intrinsically misleading in a number of ways. But that said, it's just worth being aware of this, worth understanding how movies are misleading. And because if you understand this, you can calibrate. You can calibrate what you learn from them. You can calibrate your takeaways from it. You can calibrate, sort of how you pay attention to it. And if you go in, not so much, I mean, you want to suspend your disbelief for the sake of enjoyment, but at the same time, if you really, properly understand what it is that you're seeing, it's going to do you a lot more good where you take in the good parts and don't take in the misleading parts. So, I mean, that's why I bring it up. It's something to be aware of, to be able to absorb the good that is in movies and to do it in the right sort of way rather than to be misled by it. So, until next time, may you hit everything you aim at.